Last week's episode was a little heavier than usual, and this one is going to be too, but in a different way. Today marks 1 year since my dad unexpectedly passed away. This episode, though, I will do my best, isn't going to be about sadness. It's going to be a lot about reflection, about what a year of grief actually looks like when the shock wears off and life really keeps moving. We're not great at talking about grief in today's world, in my opinion. We like timelines, we like progress. We like to think that if enough time passes, things just will get better. Unfortunately, grief doesn't work like that. So, today I want to talk about what I've learned over the last year, not as an expert, not as someone who's figured it out, but as someone who's just been living it. If you've lost someone, I hope this helps you feel less alone. And if you haven't yet, you know, tuck it away because if there, is one thing that's for certain in this life is that everybody will unfortunately experience grief at some point. So to kick it off, basically, I want to start talking about, or by talking about a podcast clip I saw by Theo Vaughn. That's been stuck in my head. I sent this to my brother, but he talks about still wanting to make his dad proud, even after his dad passed away. And that hit me harder than I really expected. And talking with a mentor of mine, she lost her dad in 2019. She also runs her own business, and she hit a huge benchmark. And she realized that when she hit that benchmark, things didn't feel as exciting as she hoped that they would. And at the end of the day, what she was hoping to hear was her dad saying that he was proud of her. And that's obviously something she's not going to hear. And she was very vulnerable, very open with us about that. And I just sat back and I struggled with that statement because obviously that's something I would love to hear as well. And I guess maybe I assumed that that feeling would fade, that, grief would be more about missing him and remembering him and what, life looks like, moving forward and, just eventually moving forward. But what I didn't expect was how much still making him proud would be tied into all of it. That desire to make him proud hasn't disappeared, and I don't want it to. I would say, if anything, it has grown stronger, sharpened, and it's something that I want to do. I've always wanted to make my parents proud. I've always, I'm a boy. I've always wanted to make my dad proud. But this year, it showed up in how I make decisions and how I approach work and how I think about integrity and effort and showing up when no one else is watching and just being consistent daily all the time. And, not really in a loud way and not in a performative way, just quietly doing what I need to do. And I think that's how my dad did things. At his funeral, the amount of people that showed up and the sheer number of people that showed up and the amount of people that had stories about how my dad impacted their lives that I had absolutely no clue about. That was tough and humbling, but it was incredible because I know him as dad. Like, he's my dad. He was always there and never really talked about how to live life, but more so just showed me how to do it. And, a client of ours got me this rock shortly after my dad passed. And that's exactly what it says on there. Like, my dad didn't tell me how to live, he showed me. And that's what I've been trying to do this year when it really comes down to it is I've realized this year isn't about like proving anything. It's just about alignment and living in a way that still feels honest and still feels like I'm putting my best foot forward, even when, like, the person that I want to impress isn't physically here anymore. And it showed up a lot in just being a dad. I shoot, there's been so many times I've been wanting to like be like, "Hey dad, how bad did I screw this one up?" or "What should I do here?" And I'm lucky. I'm a very, very lucky one because I had a model, a role model to model everything after. And I think that feeling of, him being proud has just really heightened this year. And that's something that's really completely caught me off guard. And so with that, there's obviously been gut punches. And I think everybody that's gone through grief can attest to this. And this, again, this is not, there's no expert advice here, guys. This is just what I've learned. And I'm hoping that you know that you're not alone with this. Going into it, I was probably naive. This has been brutal. And the hardest parts of grief haven't been the big days. Sure, there is a ton of anxiety around his birthday that was just a few weeks ago that we didn't get to celebrate with him, and Thanksgiving, and you know, today it's the 1 year. So like there's a lot of stress and anxiety and emotions that come with that. But in my opinion, those aren't the hardest days. The harder days are the small ones, the moments where something happens, good, frustrating, or meaningless. And your first instinct is just to call them, right? Like, it's like you just want to pick up your phone and call. One example that pops into my mind is the Micah Parsons trade. That is wholeheartedly something my dad would have called about. Hey, Trev, I hope your day is going well. Not sure if you saw the trade, but I just want to call, hear your thoughts, get your opinions, and, you know, hear what you have to say about it. Okay. Sounds good. Talk soon, buddy. I love you. Like, that's exactly what my dad would have said. I've been going to Packer games with my dad for 31 years, every year. And every Sunday, I wait for him to call. Still, luckily, I'm thankful for this. It took me a little bit, but I've listened to voicemails that he left me when I've missed those Sunday calls before the game and had to call him back before kickoff, or got to call him back before kickoff. And, every 20, 25 minutes before kickoff, I'm pulling up a voicemail and listening to it. Um, that's helped me, that's been helpful, but it's not the same, right? And it's not the same as having a random thought, or driving, or sitting quietly and then, or having something happen and you just reach for your phone without thinking, not for advice, not for a crisis, not for anything crazy, just to talk. And that's when reality hits, because for that split second of time, you forget. And then it's that gut punch. That's when reality hits. When I remember that my dad's not here, that's when things really get knocked out of me and when I really lose it. And that has been, shoot, maybe since like month 3 or 4, the single worst thing that gets me every single time is those moments, or those brief seconds that you forget. And then it all just comes, right back at you. Those big gut punches, because they literally come out of nowhere. You can be having a great day. You can be feeling normal and feeling strong and, laughing. And then one small thing in the split second can remind you, and suddenly you are right back in it. I've had other people lose parents this year. And when reaching out and ask how they're doing, they're like, oh, not well. And, I don't even necessarily like that question, because how do you answer that? And I understand, like, what are you supposed to say to people that are grieving? Because people don't handle it well in today's world. Like, it's just not something that's handled well, and people think you shouldn't talk about it. And in my opinion, the single best thing I've been able to do is talk about my dad and have conversations. I don't do well if I can't talk about him. He deserves to be talked about. He's a person that deserves to be talked about and remembered and celebrated. And so, it's just interesting, those moments where you forget. and then all of a sudden you're right back in it. So you can be having a great day, and that can change in the split second. So, like, to answer that question, how's your day going? There's no answer because you can be up and down. It's a roller coaster that you just can't get off of. Grief doesn't announce itself; it just shows up. So, with that, I'm somebody that wants to understand because I think there's a solution to every problem. Maybe I'm naive, but I think anything can be figured out, honestly. I always have. And I will search and read and do what I need to do to find that answer. And if I'm not the one that has that knowledge base, I'm going to find somebody that does and I'm going to find an answer. So I've done a lot of reading. I've read grief books. I have researched, and, most people have heard of the 5 stages of grief. And I think this is important to cover. It's that denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance. And those were introduced by a psychiatrist named Elizabeth Kubler Ross in her work with terminally ill patients. Um, and over time, what happened with those 5 stages is they got turned into something that they were never meant to be. And that's a checklist. It's a timeline, a way to measure whether you are doing grief right or passing the test of grief, you know, which is crazy to me. It's crazy. And later in her life, she came out and explained that the stages were never meant to be linear. They weren't steps that you moved through in order. They were just emotional responses. It was literally meant to be a framework to help people understand what they might feel, not a roadmap to get over loss. And I think too many people view it as I will move through each stage. And once I get through the last stage, I win. And there's no winning. This isn't a game that has a win or a loss outcome. You're always going to lose, in my opinion. And I don't know if that's accurate or right, but like grief isn't something to win. You don't hit denial and then anger and then bargaining and then depression and then acceptance and then you graduate. You can feel all of them at once. You can skip some entirely. You might go back and have one that you didn't feel for a couple of months over and over again. And you stay stuck in that spiral or you stay stuck in those stages. And that's where people get stuck because, you know, you think once you reach acceptance, that means that the pain is gone. But acceptance doesn't mean that you're okay with it. You're never going to be okay with it. It just means you're learning how to live with it. Again, grief is a freaking roller coaster that you don't win. It just changes. And if you're listening to this thinking, why does this hit me? Nothing's wrong with you. You're just grieving, and that's okay. Another thing that I've taken away from this year is that when people say it gets better, I have, I don't want to say an issue with that statement. I just don't think it's accurate because instead of saying things are going to get better, people hang on to that. And honestly, I don't know. I don't think it's an accurate statement. I think it gets different. You get stronger and you learn how to carry it. So, i- if you take one thing from this episode, let it be this: you're not broken if grief still hits you. You're not behind. There's nothing to fix. Grief isn't something that you complete, it's just something that you have to integrate. And dad, on the one year, if there's one thing I've learned this year, it's that grief is just love with nowhere to go. I hope heaven has been amazing this past year. I miss you more than I could ever put into words. I think about you all the time. I talk to you, shoot, every day, all the minutes, probably more than I should admit. But I hope that I'm making you proud. And I dream a lot, Dad. So if you ever feel like visiting, you are always more than welcome. I love you.